And welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am your host, Daren. Jaime, we're bringing you a forum that's providing deeper understanding on the issues and inequities that so many people face, from systemic inequalities to pressing social global problems. Our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. So stay tuned because the Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. According to the United States Department of Health and Human Services, states reported over 500,000 victims of child abuse and neglect. 76% of those victims are neglected, 16% are physically abused, and about 10% are sexually abused, and little than, 0.2%, I would say, are actually sex trafficked. Now, for more than 30 years, the New York Foundling's Child Abuse Prevention Program has given children the tools they need to prevent as well as report abuse. We're pleased to have joining us to discuss more about this is the manager of Child Abuse Prevention Program at the New York Foundling, Trevor Raushi. And Trevor, glad to have you with us.
Good afternoon, Daren. Thank you for having us. How are you?
Thank you. I'm glad to have you here with us, and glad to have you talking about, well, not glad, but glad to have you as a voice in this particular matter. Trevor, when we talk about child abuse, I gave some statistics at the beginning of the show, but give us from your perspective just how prevalent child abuse is right here in New York.
Well, as you described, Daren, child abuse manifests itself in many different ways, right? You discussed physical abuse, sexual abuse, you mentioned neglect, all of those different ways that child abuse can come up and manifest itself in a child's life. And so when you consider all of that, it is pretty common, unfortunately, right? But there are also ways to address it. And at the Child Abuse Prevention Program within the New York Foundling, we are covering all of our bases, and we are certainly trying to address it from every direction in which we can by educating children, parents and caregivers, and even the professionals at schools that are involved in these children's lives.
Yeah. When we talk about education about child abuse and really making the public more and more aware, before we go into a little bit more in depth, give me your assessment. Do you feel as though people are even ready to have that conversation? Because it's a touchy situation, and to bring it up and to talk about it and to have it received and then to have action taken on it, we find sometimes people aren't really as fast and proactive in this area.
I understand what you're saying, and that to an extent, I agree that is true. Some people can be reluctant to talk about it. It is an uncomfortable subject, of course. It can be an unpleasant subject. However, it's an important subject to address. And I would add on to that and extend that to say that I think that sometimes in our society, folks are uncomfortable addressing this topic specifically with children. However, is there a group of people who need to discuss this topic more than children, right? They are the victims of child abuse inherently. And so it is our duty as a society and as the adults that are tasked with caring for children to educate them and to arm them with the tools that they need to be able to identify and report if they are in an unsafe situation, if they are being groomed, or if they are or have been abused.
So we talk about making people aware. And I know, as we said, New York Foundling does a great job in terms of educating everybody from parents all the way down to the child themselves. Let's talk about having that conversation with children and the work that you're doing right there, because there is a great amount of awareness that you're doing by putting armed information in the hands of children.
Absolutely. So the cornerstone of CAP, the Child Abuse Prevention Program's work, you mentioned we've been servicing New York City schools and New York City communities since 1986. And the cornerstone of our work is our Child Safety Workshop. Now, this workshop is a interactive hour-long workshop designed specifically for elementary age children that uses life-size puppets to talk about this very serious topic in a fun and engaging way. And so we bring these life-size puppets to elementary schools across all of New York City, all 5 boroughs, and they share their stories about physical abuse, sexual abuse. They discuss safe and unsafe touch, the difference between abuse and punishment, and they help, most importantly probably, they help children identify trusted adults and arm them with the tools they need to communicate and speak to those trusted adults if they have ever been or are currently in an unsafe situation.
When you talk about educating young people in that kind of way, using puppets, making it a little bit more friendly, making it a little less, making it more light. Talk about the receptivity of young people who, who are getting this information. What's the takeaway that you're seeing amongst them?
Watching students participate in this workshop is one of the most interesting parts of this job, I believe. When the workshop begins, you might see some giggles, you might see some smiles on their faces, right? And it might feel like it's about to be an hour full of fun, and it is. But as soon as the puppets start sharing their stories and the trained facilitators start leading the conversations, right? You see that the fun quickly transitions to a learning opportunity. And the wheels start turning in these children's head when they're participating in this workshop, and they start thinking about their own experiences and applying the messaging to their own lived experience. And sometimes you have children in the audience that are then questioning, is what's happening to me safe? Or is what happened to me last year okay? Or is this something that I should talk to an adult about? Is this something that I should reach out and ask for help about? And that's the exact goal of the workshop.
Are we finding the kids are asking a lot of questions?
Yes. So the students have the opportunity, and I should explain, the workshop is typically facilitated for about 75 to 120 students at a time, maybe the whole third grade, let's say. So the students participate as a grade, and they can ask questions and interact throughout the workshop. However, what sets our program and our workshop apart from some similar programs is that there is a built-in component at the end of the workshop where any students who may have a follow-up question or something personal that they want to share, they have the chance to speak with one of our trained facilitators or their school counselor or school social worker immediately following the workshop. And that is a crucial component to this workshop. We do believe that it would be inappropriate to share this messaging with children, right? To give them this messaging, tell them that if something unsafe happens to them, that they should tell an adult, but then not provide them with that opportunity to do so. And so it's during that time, immediately following the workshop, where students can stay and speak with our facilitators or their school counselor and ask follow-up questions or share something that might be a safety concern that they're currently experiencing. Ask for help.
You mentioned third graders. Is there any particular reason that you use third graders as a target audience?
All students, all children of all ages deserve and are entitled to educational lessons about these topics, right? They deserve to know about this. They deserve to be equipped with these tools. Our specific workshop, the Child Safety Workshop, it is designed specifically for this age group of elementary age children. So the language we use, the details of the stories that we share are carefully designed to be appropriate and engaging for the elementary age student, as well as the life-size puppets, right? At that age, they still really engage with the puppets. They find them to be interesting. They can follow the stories really well. If you get a little older, I'm not so sure I would take a puppet in and try to have a conversation with a high school student, right?
Yeah.
I might get laughed out of the auditorium.
Yeah. I mean, well, after a while, I think, well, no, that's not true. I think there's some adults who still enjoy puppets, but they're few and far. They're definitely few and far between. Speaking of adults, talk to me about your work there, because in addition to educating children, you're also taking the time to make sure the parents are also looking out for warning signs as well.
Absolutely. Parents and professionals. So the way that we connect with the children first is by inviting their school counselors and school social workers to a full-day professional training that we host, where we share with them everything we know about child abuse and maltreatment, the warning signs, and we share with them extensive resources that we have, localized resources in their neighborhood to help them address and respond to signs of child abuse and maltreatment if they see them. So that's what we do with the professionals first. But then, yes, about 7 years ago, we created 2 parent and community workshops, one on the topic of positive parenting and the other on the topic of internet safety. Now, both of these workshops were created because through our work with the children, we would hear different stories, different disclosures that involved different safety concerns. And one of the first questions we would always ask children, when we're taking these disclosures, when we're speaking with them, when we're working with them, is, did you tell your parent? Did you tell your caregiver? Did you share this with your family, right? Did you ask that person that you live with, that adult, for help? And very often we were hearing no, for a variety of reasons. Some of them might have been scared. Some of them might have been intimidated. Some of them might not have had the language or known that this was, something that they should be sharing. And so we created these parent and community workshops as a way of bridging that gap and addressing these problems from all angles, right? So not just with the children, but also with the parents and their guardians and the adults in their lives that are tasked with taking care of them.
And so, for those who may just be joining us, we've got Trevor Raushi, who's the manager of Child Abuse Prevention Program at the New York Foundling, who does a great job of really educating parents and caregivers and those, as well as children, in the area of child abuse prevention. Trevor, when we talk about child abuse prevention in the New York Foundling, obviously it's something that you take very seriously. What else do you offer at the Foundling when it comes to child abuse prevention?
Well, the Child Abuse Prevention Program is just one of many different programs that the New York Foundling has to offer. The New York Foundling is a citywide agency that has a presence in all 5 boroughs. We have many different departments that offer services for adults with developmental disabilities. We cater to youth and foster care by providing tutoring services and support for the families, both the foster parents and the children, college prep. The list goes on and on. I am consistently in awe of my peers and colleagues at the New York Foundling, and I always appreciate getting a little insight into the programs that they run as well and getting able to collaborate, especially with them, because there is such an extensive reach that we do have, and it is only growing. You know, the Foundling's goal is to really support every community and support every child in reaching their full potential. So I'm impressed every day with the work that my colleagues do, and it is not just the Child Abuse Prevention Program. It is definitely the agency-wide.
Yeah. And when we talk about the agency-wide work, obviously the New York Foundling has been around for a while doing the work. When we talk about child abuse and really these numbers that we're taking a look at, give me a little bit of insight into COVID. Because did you see a spike in reporting or the need for counseling or the need to really, beef up services with the fact that so many people are now living indoors?
Absolutely. And first of all, I was really proud of my team specifically. We were able to, when the pandemic hit and the schools went remote, we were able to get really creative. And even in isolation from 5 different locations, we were able to use the technology to our advantage and somehow record this hour-long workshop with the life-size puppets and continue to facilitate the workshop even during the pandemic while the schools were remote, while the children were remote learning. So that was pretty impressive, and I just want to give a shout out to my team for that because we're so grateful that we were able to do so. But then, yes, after once schools kind of went back into the building and we were able to bring our workshop back into the building as well, we did start to hear some different things coming from the students, right? Different experiences, and a lot of which involved technology, right? Which makes perfect sense. You know, during the pandemic, all of us, including children, were spending more time using technology. And so what we heard and what we're continuing to hear is the different nuanced ways that technology is now involved and intersects with child abuse. I'll give you one example, for instance, without sharing any personal information or any graphic details. I was in an elementary school, and I was working with a child and took a disclosure from a young girl, 8 years old, who was currently experiencing sexual abuse. She had not shared this with any other adults in her lives before. And one of the reasons why is because she was being bribed by this immediate family member who was abusing her. Now, a bribe is not something new to us, right? Especially when we think of the grooming process. However, this bribe was not US dollar. It was the gaming currency, so digital tokens for a very popular online game that we know many, many, many elementary students are using very frequently. And so that, raised a red flag for us and set off an alarm because that was something that we hadn't really heard before. It was certainly new and related to the technology. And we were pretty confident that it was something that parents and caregivers also weren't necessarily familiar with and wouldn't always be looking out for. And so that, again, is another example of something that we have learned from our work with children that we then brought to our parent and community workshops to share with the adults as well, so they can better understand how they can work to help protect their children and keep them safe.
Yeah, you kind of led into what I wanted to talk about, because if I'm a parent or an adult, what are some of the warning signs and things that I should be looking for when we talk about child abuse?
Something that we encourage all the parents and caregivers that attend our workshops to focus on is communication, right? So open lines of communication with your children, with your families, meaning you don't necessarily want your children to be scared of you. Of course, you want them to respect you, and when it comes to discipline and guidance, children need discipline, but we don't want them to be scared of you, because should something happen to them, should they find themselves in an unsafe situation, should they find themselves being groomed by a predator, you are the person that you want them to come and talk to. You are the person that you want them to reach out to and ask for help, because you are responsible for that. And so really to focus on talking to your children at all ages about abuse and abuse prevention. That includes body autonomy, right? The anatomic names for our body parts, equipping them with that knowledge. That is one of the best things you can do as a parent or a caregiver to protect your child from abuse.
And so when you notice abuse, what are the things that we can do if we're in the unfortunate situation of knowing a child that's been abused? Where do we take it from there?
Right. We always direct families, your school is a great resource, right? You use your school counselor, your school social worker, your child's school counselor, or your child's school social worker. They are very well-trained and compassionate individuals who are lifelines for many of these students, many of these children. But if you notice something or if your child does disclose something to you, the best thing you can do is support them, right? Be mindful of your reaction, of course, right? What they might share with you might be alarming, it might be upsetting. But as the adults in their lives, we need to focus on supporting them and not necessarily letting our emotional reaction lead our response. And then, of course, reporting it to authorities is the best thing you can do, whether that's your local precinct or calling the New York State hotline. There is an anonymous reporting hotline in New York State that you can use. But again, just reaching out to your local authorities is also a great option.
Yeah. And if I'm torn, because the word I want to use is torn, because sometimes I think there are parents or people out there who things may be on the fringe, right? I want to get it checked out, but if it's not, I really don't want this person to get in trouble. You've been down that street before, right? Where people have really come to you. How does a person navigate that particular point?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you bringing that back up and circling back to that, because especially when we think about physical abuse or neglect, that's not always a black and white case, right? Sometimes families just need extra resources. They need support. They need knowledge, right? Part of what we do in our parenting workshop is talk about New York State law, because we do have a lot of immigrant families here in New York City as well who might simply just not know what is legal and what is illegal in the state of New York when it comes to disciplining our children. And so that's a starting point, right? First, assess the situation and determine is this adult abusing this child, or are they in a stressful situation and could possibly use resources like therapy, help with food and grocery money, help with a job search, any of those things that can increase the stress factors in the home that could ultimately increase the risk of a child being hurt, right? So yes, jumping to make a report is never something that we recommend. Assessing the full situation and, of course, intervening and providing assistance or support is always ideal.
When we look at the numbers and we see the numbers are, somewhat staggering, and we're looking and we're seeing that there, I want to say a lot of unreported cases as well. Would you agree? I mean, we talk about the numbers that are staggering already. Would you say that there's probably a slew more that just don't get reported?
Yes, unfortunately, I would say that there probably are a number of cases that do not get reported, and there's a number of reasons why they may not get reported, right? And so for children, as we mentioned earlier, children might not report to adults because they might be afraid of repercussions. They might be afraid that they did something wrong. Predators are really skilled at grooming children, and so typically before they've done any abuse, they will convince the child that they are in the wrong, that they did something to bring this onto themselves, right? And that they are not in a position to ask for help. And so that's one barrier. Additionally, the way that we talk about these topics, right? Or the lack of the way that we talk about these topics. Sometimes, as you mentioned when we started this interview, adults are afraid to address this. Adults are afraid to bring this up because of, the can of worms that it may open. And that's not fair. As adults, we can't let our own fears or our own inability or our own lack of confidence in discussing these topics hinder the way that we're protecting our children. So those are the two biggest barriers, I would say.
But I do think we can also say that a lot of progress has been made in this area, because for a long time we weren't really talking and bringing child abuse to the forefront. It was something that was pretty much spoken about, but spoken about at low volume, low decibel. But now you could definitely look out there and say we see commercials, we see conversations, we see forums, we see things like you've got the New York Foundling, where a huge amount of awareness and public participation is taking place.
Absolutely. Even on a larger scale, when you see things like the Me Too movement, which came about in the last 10 years, right? Movements like that as a culture are wonderful because it brings the conversation to the spotlight, right? It works to remove the blame from the victim, from the survivor, and focus the blame on who actually deserves it, right? Which is the perpetrator. And so we can take a lot and learn a lot from, a movement like that.
For yourself, looking at this work that you've done, talk to me about how do you see the impact of the CAP program at New York Foundling?
Now that I've been working with the CAP program for over 7 years, I think that I have actually seen an impact in the yearly sort of reports that we get, right? I've seen a decrease in those sort of gray physical abuse cases that we would sometimes get, because I think that our three-pronged approach of really trying to reach professionals, parents and families, and children is actually helping to get the message across and actually helping to provide support and services across the city, and therefore decrease some of the risk factors that do lead to physical abuse particularly. So that's been, a really wonderful thing to see. Additionally, as we sort of, we have researchers at the Foundling. We have lots of different programs that work on doing professional developments for professionals like us internally, but also externally as well. And we attend those webinar sessions, we attend those info sessions, and we review the most current and recent research. And we use that to inform our practices and inform even the script and the language that we use in the workshops, so that we can stay abreast of the most current issues and really stay relevant and adapt as time changes. The greatest example I can give is just the way the technology is continuing to become more and more important and more involved in even young people's lives, right?
And when we look at technology, I'm thinking about, the emergence of, from things that happen on phones to online, social media. You have so many different things that people have to be worried about, Snapchat. But if you're a parent and you're not on these things, sometimes it's hard to even know what to do. That's why I'm leading to a question. When you have workshops, people can really take part in these things. When are some of the upcoming workshops that people can be a part of?
So we actually have one of the parent and community workshops coming up this Friday at 9 a.m. We offer these via Zoom. It makes them more accessible for parents and caregivers to join at their convenience. They can join from their phone. They can join with their cameras on or cameras off, whatever is most comfortable for them. And we encourage them to participate even in the chat feature. So as the year continues, right, we do usually base our schedule around the school schedule. But what we'll do is we'll host 2 parent workshops at least every single month live on Zoom. And we'll be making those links and those invitations available on the New York Foundling website. So folks can check out the New York Foundling website and look for those links and join us in any of our upcoming parent workshops on either one of the 2 topics that we offer.
Yeah. Talk to me about, we're not throwing any stones here, but talk to me about elected officials. Do you feel as though government, elected officials, those in the community are really starting to wrap around the topic of child abuse and really child abuse prevention?
I do. We're very grateful. We get a large amount of funding from the city council here in New York City, specifically my program does. So we're very grateful to the city council. We work with them quite closely. They do have a very vested interest in this topic, and they have been nothing but great supporters so far. But yes, I think in addition to that, making the conversation intersectional, right? So talking about the mental health crisis and just the pandemic and the impact that's had on everyone as well. So just broadening the conversation itself, I think, has really helped everyone, regardless of their position or maybe their profession, play a part in ending child abuse or at least decreasing child abuse. So it doesn't matter if you're a politician, if you work in school, if you work in a nonprofit, even if you work at a bank, right? There's something you can do, right? You can keep a watchful eye out. You can keep yourself in the loop and understand, the signs that you could be looking out for, right, to help prevent this.
Mm-hmm. And for parents, say for instance you have a parent of a child that's been sexually abused, sometimes by someone on the outside, very traumatic. Are there support groups that are available for, parents of children who've had, victims of, child abuse?
That's a really excellent question. And I do believe that the New York Foundling has therapy programs in place to support families, especially once they become involved in the child welfare system, if they need to make a report of abuse for that instance, right? However, if there are community-based groups that meet, I would be interested in finding that out and partnering with them, because that actually seems like a really helpful resource. So I'm going to make a note to kind of check that out, because I do think that that space in particular could be an exceptionally poignant and purposeful space for parents to meet and be able to share those experiences. Because although it may feel like a very insurmountable and unique experience for one parent when they're going through something like this, unfortunately, as we mentioned, it's not, right? It's not that unique of an experience. And there's nothing more valuable than having a community of folks to sort of, guide you through this. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, well, I was pretty interested, and get back to me and let me know if that's going on. Getting down on our time here before we close, I want to get you an opportunity to be able to share a little bit about how people can get connected to New York Foundling's Child Abuse Prevention Program and what's needed.
Right. So, we are a school-based workshop, a school-based program. So typically we facilitate these workshops in elementary schools across the city. Largely, we are in the New York City DOE schools. We partner with the school counselors and school social workers. If you are a parent and caregiver and you're watching this and you're not sure if your school hosts the Child Abuse Prevention Program, reach out to your school admin or your school counselor and ask them, right? Ask them if they are hosting the CAP Child Safety Workshop this year. And if they're not, suggest they do so. Additionally, if you are a parent who has children involved in a charter school or a private school, we are also able to serve those schools. And so same thing, reach out to your school professionals and ask if they have heard of us, if they've used us, and if not, encourage them to do so, because we are a really helpful resource.
Yeah. I know it's a very serious work that you do, but if there's any joy in the consolation of what you do, what would that be?
No, there's lots of joy in this, right? Again, our workshop is primarily preventative. We hope that when we go facilitate this workshop every morning to a group of third graders, that no one discloses anything, traumatic or of in the nature of a safety concern immediately following the workshop. Our goal is to provide this messaging and provide these tools before anything happens. So oftentimes, we get to facilitate these workshops and interact with students and, really hear them leave the room feeling empowered, feeling stronger than they came in, and with a whole, toolkit of knowledge and terms that they didn't have when they came in. And it's really kind of an exciting thing, and it feels good. And sometimes for a lot of kids, it's the first time they've heard anything like this. And it's the first time they've been told that, no one does have the right to touch them. No one does have the right to hurt them. So there's a lot of really empowering aspects to the job as well.
Trevor, Raushi, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much. Great work being done at the Foundling's Child Abuse Prevention Program. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the number they can get at to you?
212-660-1376. That's 212-660-1376. Thank you so much, Daren.
All right, Trevor Raushi, we're leaving it there. Taking a quick break. We'll have more right after this.
We all know what it's like to feel alone. But it just takes one new connection.
Want to get out of here?
To empower many.
This is unbelievable.
It doesn't take a superhero to bring forces together. We all have the power to reach out.
Let's go!
And help someone feel like they belong.
Pretty cool, huh?
We are stronger together.
You've done the hard part. You quit smoking. Now do the easy part and get scanned for lung cancer. If you smoked, you may still be at risk, but early detection could save your life. Talk to your doctor and learn more at savedbythescan.org.
And welcome back. Asian Americans Advancing Justice's mission is to advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. Now, the organization is the voice for the Asian American community fighting for civil rights through education, litigation, and public policy, as well as advocacy. We got joining us now the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Marita Etcubañez, I believe I've got it correctly. If not, she'll correct me. And Maria, good to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and so when we talk about your mission of really advancing the cause for Asian Americans, because we do know that when it comes to inequality, that many times Asian Americans find themselves on the other side.
Yes, so you have articulated the mission of our organization. We do work to preserve civil rights for the Asian American community and to empower our communities. But I think it's also important to emphasize that we're also working to create a more just America for everyone. So we're located in Washington, D.C., and our focus is on federal policy advocacy, working to safeguard immigrant rights, to eliminate hate and discrimination in all its forms, and also advocating for increased civic engagement. Now, we also have affiliates, advancing justice affiliates in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta that some people might be more familiar with. And our affiliates are focused on legal services and community building. But in the DC office, we are, as I mentioned, focused on federal policy advocacy.
Yeah. And so when we talk about advocacy, talk to me about the issues that you're really dealing with front and center right now. What do you find to be some of the biggest challenges that are actually being faced by the Asian American community?
Thank you for that question. There are so many, but in particular, in the last few years, the Asian American community has, I think as many are aware, faced increased anti-Asian hate due to people's concerns about COVID-19 and their fears about that, which are also connected to anti-China rhetoric. We have been working to provide resources for people who have experienced hate crimes or hate incidents, working to support impacted communities, and to encourage people to come forward and report and share their stories to help us build a better understanding of what our communities have been facing and to help us advocate for better informed policies to respond to this increased anti-Asian hate and violence. And also a constant challenge that our communities have faced that Advancing Justice AAJC has worked on since our organization was founded more than 30 years ago has been working to reform our country's deeply flawed immigration system. Asian Americans make up more than 30% of the immigrant population in the United States, and it's a community that is only growing in number. And we know that Asian American families are disproportionately impacted by our outdated family immigration policies. And so we have been steadfast in our advocacy for immigration policy reform, in particular measures that would unite families that have been kept apart by our immigration laws and policies.
When we talk about immigration policies, obviously I've spoken with a lot of immigration attorneys, and they'll tell you there's a huge backlog, particularly after COVID, but before COVID, things were just very challenging by way of immigration. Give us a little bit of insight as to some of that immigration. Do you still find that backlog is there and it's quite harder for those people to get papers?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So our current immigration system, which was really overhauled in 1965 due to the influence of the civil rights movement. Before 1965, U.S. immigration law heavily favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe. The immigration system was opened up in 1965, which is a good thing. But our systems haven't been significantly improved since then. And since there are limits on the number of immigrants that can come in different family categories and the number of immigrants that can come from any one country in a given year, this is what has resulted in the backlogs that we often talk about. And for certain countries and for certain family categories, that backlog is more than 20 years long. So even people who, I mean, I hate to use this rhetoric, but are trying to do things the right way and are trying to work within the system still find themselves facing decades long waits to be granted permission to immigrate to the United States. And in this case, in the family system, these are family members that have been separated for decades. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about our flawed immigration system. Um, one of many flaws, but in particular, this is what Advancing Justice AAJC has focused on for many years now.
Yeah, we hear a lot when it comes to anti-Asian rhetoric, hate, being singled out, and I know that for yourself, that's where the work begins. Talk to me. How are you, is the agency working, and how are you working to really combat this? Because when we hear of some of the things that are happening, they're admittedly frightening and also disgusting.
No, thank you for expressing that. I'll begin by saying that anti-Asian hate and discrimination, it's not new. Our communities have faced discrimination from the beginning, from when we first came to the United States. And people that are familiar with Asian American history can give you many, many examples of um, the discrimination and the hate that our communities have endured over the years. But as we have talked about, and as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic really felt like it unleashed and emboldened a lot of people's anti-Asian sentiment. And it certainly didn't help to have elected officials, including our former president, labeling it as the China virus and using other negative terms that, for many of us, it really felt like it painted a target on our backs, on Chinese Americans and more broadly Asian Americans. Um, so, our community has deeply felt the impact. And it's overwhelmingly the reports that we have received to Advancing Justice's Stand Against Hatred website and the reports that have been submitted to the site Stop AAPI Hate that was started at the beginning of the pandemic are overwhelmingly about verbal abuse and harassment, not necessarily hate crimes. But we also know that our community has endured really horrible violence in recent years, including a number of mass shootings that have really resulted in, a lot of fear and anxiety for Asian Americans that continues. I mean, some people may feel that, anti-Asian hate was at its height a couple of years ago. And while that may be true, it continues, and many in our community continue to be fearful and anxious about facing harassment or even violence when they're out and about.
We talk about hate, and we talk about immigration. We talked about really how to raise the voice, and your agency has actually worked to raise its voice. We see on a daily basis pictures that are coming up when it deals with migrants coming into the United States. It makes the question of immigration come to the front and center again. Talk to me about this, because I want to, get a little insight into family immigration, and how do you see it right now here in the United States, and what are you doing on that end to really help with family migration?
Yeah, so one of the bills that we have long championed, legislative proposal, is the Reuniting Families Act that contains many of the provisions that we feel are needed to improve the family immigration system so that families can be reunited in more timely fashion, so that people aren't subjected to these decades-long waits. That's a big part of what we need, but you also mentioned the border. Um, and Advancing Justice AAJC has, joined with our allies in calling for the repeal of Title 42, one of the harmful border policies. And, I think there's still a lot of concern about what's happening at the border. And we really feel that, the asylum system needs to remain open for people that are fleeing violence and persecution. And really, just overall, we need to be able to build an immigration system that is more fair and humane for everybody.
I know another piece of work that you're doing is our Value Our Families campaign, and I know that that's pretty near and dear to you. Talk to us about the work that's going on with the Value of Families campaign, but first, let's educate our viewers on what exactly the campaign is all about.
Sure. So first, I mentioned, working with partners. The Value Our Families campaign is a campaign that has been led by a coalition of immigrant advocacy groups. There are many of us that have been involved in this. The campaign was created about 5 years ago, and its goals are to protect, preserve, and strengthen the family immigration system. And we're really leading with our values here, and to promote an immigration system that is informed by love, empathy, and justice. So it's trying to build an immigration system that works for families. We're opposing measures that would harm family immigration. Yeah.
And when we talk about family immigration, I mean, people will say that it's not so big an issue. Immigration, and they'll try and piece things apart. But family immigration is important. It's near and dear to so many people. If I was to have someone here that says, listen, family immigration, why does that matter? Give us your take.
Sure. So it's really important for immigrants to be able to establish themselves and build roots in the United States. It's vital that they are able to immigrate with their families. And US law and policy recognizes that. Family reunification has been one of the central tenets in our immigration laws and policies for a long time. So, families support one another, we take care of each other. And it's really vital that when people immigrate, they are able to bring their spouse, their children. And our immigration system also permits people to bring their parents, their siblings, because we recognize the centrality of family unity. I think for anyone, regardless of their political beliefs, family is important for all of us, right? So I think recognizing that that is core to our immigration system, I feel that, if we all pause, most people would recognize that we really do need to improve our laws and policies so that we're not just talking about the importance of family, but that the system actually works to bring families together and not tear family members apart.
Yeah. Spend a few moments with me talking about anti-hate, because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. One of the things that I've heard from so many people when it comes to the effects of COVID-19 is that we've seen more people with hatred. As a matter of fact, we know that we were home, we were watching, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. We saw hatred at its worst, and we saw, injustice at its worst for times during COVID. For yourself, give me a little bit about what you saw during the pandemic when it came to anti-Asian hate.
Mm-hmm. This was an incredibly hard time for so many of us, right? But I think also, in particular, Asian American communities, because we were all dealing with the pandemic and all of the tensions and stress and grief that brought up. But then on a daily basis, hearing news reports about Asian Americans that were being attacked, whether it was in the form of verbal abuse on the street, physical assaults, or even, horrendous violence in the form of mass shootings, like this just really compounded a lot of the fear and anxiety that Asian Americans were facing. We have a lot of statistics to back this up. It's not just, anecdotal stories, although I know we all have them. We all have people in our lives that can speak to facing anti-Asian hate. I mentioned already our website, Stand Against Hatred. The Stop AAPI Hate site has compiled more than 11,000 individual stories of anti-Asian hate and harassment that people have brought to their attention. the FBI hate crime statistics for 2021, which were just updated this spring, show the highest number of hate crimes in the United States in more than 2 decades, and in particular demonstrate a huge spike in hate crimes motivated by anti-Asian hate. And we could share so many stories about what our communities have been facing. And again, I know some people have responded by unfortunately isolating themselves because of their fears about being targeted. Um, it's been a really challenging time for so many, but I will also say that we have seen a lot of people come forward, banding together to protest against anti Asian hate, to demonstrate their support and solidarity with Asian American communities. And even beyond that, I have seen many people from the Asian American community join in broader social justice protests, including, in 2020, the many marches and demonstrations in support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
And when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously it galvanized a lot of attention. Did you think that it really helped to really shine a light on Asian American? I mean, I should say, anti-Asian hate, because you got one group over here that's saying, "Listen, we need to pay attention," but you have on another side a wider flashlight that's really seems to be being placed just on the issue of injustice, on the issue of hatred, on the issue of violence. I mean, I think that while people had some really hard things to say about Black Lives Matter on the negative side, I think there's a lot of great things that came out of Black Lives Matter, and that being one of them.
Yes, I think that the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the mobilization that has been part of that really has, as you said, shined a light on racial discrimination and injustice in this country. And I think as a lot of people engaged in introspection, right, and we're trying to think of how they could be, better allies to impacted communities, communities of color, how they could work on becoming anti-racist themselves. I do think that a lot of people recognized how so many of these issues impacting vulnerable communities are interconnected. And so I think it's fair to say that it wasn't just Asian Americans advocating on Asian American issues, although certainly we saw a lot of that, and it's a good thing, but that people from different communities were stepping out and demonstrating their support for all communities impacted by hate and violence. And I think that is something that we need to continue to support. Again, I think that a lot of people might look at, the marches and demonstrations from 2020 and feel like that is done. I think it's really incumbent on all of us to make sure that none of this is done, right? That the work continues, and that when we talk about solidarity, we're doing it for real, that we are working to support one another and not just speaking up when we feel our own communities are directly impacted.
Right. Let's go back to your agency and the work that you do, really trying to make sure that you're a strong voice and advocate. What are some of the priorities and initiatives that you find to be very paramount right now that we, the public, can be paying attention to try to help to bolster the work that you're doing?
Thank you. So, I think it's important to highlight that we did mark a significant victory in May of 2021 with passage of the federal COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which was, frankly, I was surprised, passed with overwhelming support in both the Senate and the House, and obviously signed into law by the president, that would improve how law enforcement responds to and compiles and reports data on hate crimes, where there's still a lot of work to be done. So we felt that that was a really important win, and we continue to advocate for proper implementation of that law, because law enforcement agencies are still in the process of transitioning to this new reporting system. And we saw a lot of issues with the latest release of hate crimes data from the FBI the 2021 hate crimes data that was initially released in December of last year, but the FBI has since released supplemental data, which is much more accurate. But the fact that we've sort of done this in fits and starts points to the fact that we really need law enforcement agencies to complete that transition quickly and effectively so that we have better data on hate crimes, so that we and policymakers have a better and fuller understanding of what our communities have been facing and can craft better solutions accordingly. Um, you know, when it comes to advocacy, an important thing to raise for the Asian American community, since a significant portion of our population, we're still a largely immigrant community, has limited proficiency in English. And so language access is really an important part of our advocacy, trying to ensure that when people seek to access government benefits and services, if they don't speak English well, that their limited English ability doesn't serve as a barrier to their accessing programs and services. And this is, of course, really important in the context of people that have experienced hate crimes and hate incidents. We don't want someone's inability to speak English to be what prevents them from getting the help they need, whether that's from law enforcement or social service agencies. I could say a lot more, but let me pause here and let you ask questions.
No, you're doing well. I mean, I think really the conversation needs to be had, and you do a great job of being, a much-needed voice, and I think that's the issue, that we want to talk about how we can help to raise the voice, because we're all in this together. And when it comes to the issue of inequality, when it comes to the issue of, social inequality, we need to hear, and it's very different sometimes because Asian Americans, Asians can feel something totally different than, those who may be of Latino descent. Those could be of Indian descent, right? So the challenges vary, but however, there's the same unique foundation. So to hear some of the unique challenges, to know how the voice can be raised collectively to support is much needed.
Thank you. And so I think one thing that we should talk about more is, one of the solutions we advocate for on addressing anti-Asian hate is actually fuller and more robust teaching of all of our histories as part of public education. So we, of course, are focused on teaching Asian American history, because there's a lot of lessons that many of us didn't learn when we were coming up, in elementary and high school. And for many of us, we didn't get to learn about Asian American history until maybe college, and for some people, maybe never, right? So we are advocating for more inclusive teaching and honest teaching about race in the United States. So this is something where, again, we are leading with Asian American history, but of course, we feel that it's important that fuller history of all people in the United States needs to be incorporated into public education curricula. And well, we feel that that's a good thing, full stop, but also that more diverse education is really one of the things that we need to help break down stereotypes, break down misunderstandings, and help all of us better understand the contributions of all people that make up our diverse country.
So if people want to get connected, how do they go about getting connected to the work that you're doing and become more aware?
That's a great question. Thank you. So, in response to, in particular, increased anti-Asian hate, we have done a number of things to build up our capacity to better serve the community. And one of the programs that we have built that I am particularly proud of is our work with an organization named Right to Be. Some people might better know them by their past name, which was Hollaback. They're based in New York. And they have been providing training on how to respond to street harassment for many years. At the beginning of the pandemic, they reached out to us and asked if we would be interested in adapting their training to the context of anti-Asian hate. We, of course, said yes. And with the launch of our first training in April 2020, we had over 1,000 people register for each of those free webinars. So it was clear that we were meeting a need as people were eager to learn about what they could do individually to support the Asian American community, but more importantly, I think, also importantly, learn about what they could do to help take care of themselves and others when they witness harassment happening. So at this point, several years on, we have reached and trained more than 150,000 people. We continue to offer our trainings with Right to Be free of charge. They're 1 hour sessions that are available online, so they're very accessible. So we encourage people to, if they haven't already taken advantage of that training, find one of our upcoming sessions and join us. So you can, as we say in the training, become part of our movement to end hate and harassment in all of its forms. But it's not just on the individual. We're talking about huge systemic problems, systemic racism, addressing white supremacy. And these issues, complex issues require solutions at many different levels. So I've talked about advancing Justice AAJC's policy advocacy. We would love for more people to get involved in our work, whether it's to advance immigration reform, whether it's to improve response to hate crimes and hate incidents and discrimination generally, or to advance more diverse teaching, and encourage people to take a look at our website and see the different campaigns that we have going. Sign up to receive our emails and action alerts so that you can get involved. And then, I realize that advocacy work might feel sort of out of reach for a lot of people. And I get that, but it really isn't. Also encourage people to get involved in your local community. There are so many organizations and individuals that have been working to address, injustice that they see in their neighborhoods. So get involved in different organizations and coalitions. If you're concerned about, for example, the state of education, book bans, all of that, if you're not already participating in your local school board meetings or your PTA, that's a great way to get plugged in, learn about what's going on, and add your voice to what you feel is needed to build, a more just society for everybody.
Well, Marita, we want to thank you so much for being with us, giving us more information. I want to let people know that if you want to find out, she is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and that is AAAJ. You can also find her out on social media and the website, and certainly a lot of things to discuss. And I'm glad that you spent some time telling with us today about the issues, and not just the issues, but also the great work you're doing in terms of providing some much-needed solutions. Marita, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Well, I want to let you know we have come to the end of our show today. Hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice Forums. Now, to rewatch this week's edition, catch the recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can also visit our social media pages at BronxNet TV. And join us next week. We'll continue to elevate the discussion, bring further awareness across the globe. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care and God bless.